guys, so today I thought I would share with you my TBR for the Reading Women 2019 Reading Challenge. So if you're not familiar, the Reading Women is a podcast, a bookish podcast run by Autumn and Kendra. Kendra, who also has a booktube channel, which I'll link down below. I'll link everything I mentioned down below, and it's one of my favourite podcasts. I actually had the great honour of doing a crossover episode with them and my podcast, That's Ancient History, but I love their podcast, I love what they're all about, and every year they come out with a reading challenge. So they set a list of kind of specifications or categories to read books within written by women, because they're all about encouraging us to celebrate women writers. So I decided to participate in the 2019 Reading Challenge, and for a lot of the categories I've already picked a book that would fit into that I want to read. I haven't picked a book for every single category, some of them because I just don't have a book on my shelf that fulfills that category, or maybe I have too many, but that doesn't mean I don't want to fulfill those categories, it just means I haven't picked a book yet, and I do have all of 2019, and it might also be a nice opportunity for you to recommend me books in those categories if it's a sort of category, how many times can I say that word, that you are familiar with some literature in. But without further ado, let's get into the books. So the first category is a mystery or thriller book written by a woman of colour, and for that I have My Sister the Serial Killer by Oyinkan Braithwaite. And this sounds brilliant. It sounds slightly like a surreal literary fiction mystery thriller, and I've heard really great things about it. I hear it's a little bit like darkly comical and satirical, which I love. And it's about two sisters, one of whom has just killed another one of her boyfriends, and her other sister has turned up to help her clean up the mess. And it's about what is going on here. Why have multiple of her boyfriends been murdered? Why is her sister helping her cover it up? And that just sounds absolutely fascinating to me and really unique. Like, I've not read a book like this at all. And I have to say, looking at this category, I don't see a lot of mystery thrillers by women of colour talked about on BookTube. So if you do have more recommendations, let me know, but I'm super excited for this one. The next category is a book about women with a mental illness. This one I haven't picked a book for yet, and we'd be very, very happy to hear your recommendations for. We then have a book by an author from Nigeria or New Zealand. So I'm already in the process of fulfilling this challenge because I'm currently listening to Heart's Blood by Juliet Marillier on audiobook, who is an author that was born in New Zealand and now lives in Australia, I believe. And it's a high fantasy retelling of Beauty and the Beast. And if you watched any of my videos last year, you will know that Juliet Marillier became one of my absolute favourite authors, and this is my 8th book by her. Thankfully, she's written quite a few, so I'm very much enjoying that, and it fulfills that category. Again, we have one that I don't have a book for, and that is a book about or set in Appalachia. We'd love to hear recommendations, because I don't think I have any books currently on my shelf that fulfill that category, but if you know of any, then I can check if my library has them, so that would be brilliant. And then a children's book is one that I wanted to read at the end of last year and just didn't get around to, and that is Wondersmith by Jessica Townsend. This is a book I don't own, but my library does have. I already borrowed it and didn't manage to read it, so I've returned it, but we'll borrow it again for this challenge. And it is the sequel to Nevermore, which is a children's middle grade series about a young girl called Morrigan Crow who is cursed to die on her 11th birthday, but instead of dying, she's whisked away by an eccentric man to the world of Nevermore, where she is tasked with taking part in these sort of challenges to get into the Wondrous Society. And it was such a wonderful children's series. It was one of those children's books that adults can very much enjoy, which I think is very special. And I'm super excited to read the sequel to it this year. The next category at first I really struggled with, and it's a multi-generational family saga, because this is a genre or a subcategory of book that I tend to steer clear of. I have in my head that I don't like multi-generational family sagas, which might be based on very little, because I don't think I've actually read that many, so I need to get past that bias in my head. And I realised I did have one on my shelves that I do really want to read, so hopefully this will inspire me to check more multi-generational family sagas out after I read it, and that is Homegoing by Yad Jassi. This has been on my bookshelf for far too long. As you can tell, I've had it since the hardback came out, and I feel like everyone and their grandmother has read this book and loved it. It is about two women, one of whom is sold into slavery, the other who becomes the wife of a slave trader, and how their descendants' lives unfold depending on which sister they are the descendant of, so we follow them through the generations. The next category is a book about a woman in science, and I don't have any sort of earthly books, contemporary books dealing with this topic. I do have a science fiction book about a space woman. This is Memoirs of a Space Woman by Naomi Mitchison, and this is an astronaut woman who's travelling space and encountering aliens. So that could fit into the category, but I don't know if it should really be a book that's sort of set in a more realistic setting as opposed to a science fiction setting. So if you have recommendations of books that aren't science fiction, that feature women in science, I would really like to hear them, because I think I should try and do that. We then have a play, and for that I have The Thebans by Liz Locket, which is Liz Locket's dramatic interpretation of the tragic plays of Oedipus, Jocasta, Antigone as told by Sophocles and Euripides, and I have very much enjoyed some of Liz Locket's other sort of Scots dramatic retellings of ancient Greek myths, so I'm sure I'm going to love this as well. We then have a novella, which is another one I am on my way to completing because I have almost finished it, and that is The Passion by Jeanette Winterson. I'm loving this book. I did start it at the end of last year and then ended up putting it down, but I'm back on it and near the end, love it. It's around 150 pages, so I think it fulfills the novella category, and this one is a magical realism historical fiction book set during the Napoleonic Wars. It's very difficult to explain, but it is very quintessentially Jeanette Winterson in its style, and it's beautiful. I don't have a book about a women athlete, so let me know your recommendations, but I do have a book featuring a religion other than your own, as that is particularly easy since I'm not religious. I consider myself an atheist. But I do have the sequel to Sophia Khan Is Not Obliged. This is the other half of Happiness. I read the first book in a series a couple of years ago now and very much enjoyed it. Our protagonist is a Muslim woman living in London and working in publishing. It's sort of based on Bridget Jones's Diary and Pride and Prejudice, but obviously again has a protagonist with a religion that is not my own, like all religions are. So I have been meaning to get to a sequel for ages, and think this is the time to take advantage of that. For a translated book published before 1945, and that means the original text as opposed to necessarily the translation, I have A Great Love by Alexandra Kollontai. This book was originally written in Russian, and this is a very old edition of my mum's that was translated by Kathy Porter. I don't know if this edition is in print anymore. It was originally $2.95, it says on the back. But this is a book my mum's always recommended to me. It is about a young woman who's a political activist in a relationship with a political activist, and kind of how her partner, despite being so aligned with her politically, can actually be incredibly sexist and demeaning to her and treat her very terribly, and how she can be in this sort of like toxic relationship with somebody who presents himself as being so admirable, and finding her own foot in the world of political activism, and finding herself and escaping this relationship. So I think this sounds like really important and timeless, so I'm excited to finally read it. We then have a book written by a South Asian author, and the only one I could immediately think of in my bookcase is We Are Displaced by Malala Yousafzai. So this is collecting together tales from various different refugee girls, all of whom are not South Asian, although Malala is, as she is from Pakistan. So I'm not sure if this one entirely counts, but I would like to read it this year. So regardless, do let me know if you have any more recommendations of books by South Asian women. A book I do have by an Indigenous woman for the next category though is Trail of Lightning. This is by Rebecca Roanhorse, who is a mixed-race Native American, and this is a sort of futuristic dystopian science fiction fantasy novel. It seems like one of those ones where it kind of blurs genres. It says, while most of the world has drowned beneath the sudden rising waters of a climate apocalypse, Danata, formerly the Navajo Reservation, has been reborn. The gods and heroes of legends walk the land, but so do monsters. And then our protagonist is a monster hunter. I've heard really great things about this one, and I really don't think I've read a book by a Native American author before, so that is something that I should be prioritising. So thanks for reminding me. Reading Women Challenge, I'll be reading this. We then have a book from the 2018 Reading Women Award shortlist, so either their non-fiction or fiction shortlists. So obviously I have a limited selection to pick from that category, and they have shortlisted some fantastic books. They do run an annual prize celebrating, again, women writers. I haven't picked one in particular though that I'm going to read, so I'll just see how I go throughout the year. If you can recommend one in particular, do let me know. We then have a romance or love story, which not a problem. I've already read 2 fantasy romance books, Eidolon and another book by Grace Draven, and I'm currently reading a Beauty and the Beast retelling. The sequel to Sophia Can is a romance. Honestly, I don't think I need to pick something out specifically. I will read a lot of romance fantasy at least, if not more romance fiction during the year. So I know I'll fulfill that challenge. A book about nature is another one that I haven't picked a book for, so let me know if you have a recommendation. We then have a historical fiction book, so I kind of have 2 that I'm keeping a particular eye on. I really want to read some Laura Purcell because I now have 2 of her books, including The Corset and The Silent Companions. So I'd like to read one of those books. They sound brilliant. And I'd like to read some Sarah Waters, because I've been meaning to read Sarah Waters for the longest time, guys. But it's not an either or, I want to read both. For a book you bought or borrowed in 2019, so I already have bought 3 books this year, and I have 2 of them on this list, the other one's for another category, but I thought I would mention The Queen of Blood, book 1 of the Queens of Renthia series by Sarah Beth Durst, because my friend Jill and I both bought this recently and we're planning on reading it together in February. So I thought this one would fit this category quite well. It's a high fantasy novel, lovely little mass market paperback, which I love. I used to hate these, but I've really grown to love these. I don't really know much about this book other than it's a high fantasy where one woman stands between these malevolent spirits and the end of humankind, the Queen. Basically, I like high fantasy with female protagonists, so I've got this one. For the next category, a book you picked up because of the cover. I wouldn't say I exclusively picked this book up because of the cover, but it's certainly a cover that I adore, and that is The Bear and the Nightingale by Catherine Arden. And the 3rd book in the series is about to come out, or has come out now, so I really need to get around to the first one since I've heard amazing things. It is a fantasy novel inspired by Russian folklore, I believe. I mean, as it goes, books I haven't read yet on my shelves by women with beautiful covers, this is definitely top of the list. We then have a book in a series. Again, I'm not going to list a specific book because there's tons already in this TBR, and there will be others I pick up during the year. But lastly, for the specific categories, is a young adult book by women of colour, and for that I have the other book that I picked up this year that I mentioned, and that's Wild Beauty by Anna-Marie Mclemore. So Anna-Marie Mclemore is a Latina woman, and I haven't read any of her books before, but I've heard amazing things, and I purely picked this book up on the basis of the author being raved about. So on the back it says, for nearly a century, the Nomi-Levides women have tended the ground of La Pradera, the lush estate gardens that enchant guests from around the world. They've also hidden a tragic legacy. If they fall in love too deeply, their lovers vanish. I think that in itself sounds fascinating, and I think it's also going to be a young adult fantasy novel that draws on sort of cultures other than sort of like the popular white Western magical folklore canon that is often seen in fantasy, so I'm excited to get to this author. There are then 2 bonus suggestions though, and one is to read a book by Jesmyn Ward and the other by Jhumpa Lahiri. I don't have a book by Jhumpa Lahiri currently on my TBR, but that's not to say I won't try and pick one up if I feel like I really want to complete all of these challenges. But I do have a couple of books by Jesmyn Ward on my TBR. In particular, I'd love to read her autobiography, The Men We Reaped, which just has had amazing reviews, in particular from the hosts over at Reading Women. And I read my first Jesmyn Ward book in 2018 because of Kendra and Autumn, so I would like to pick up my second this year as well. Whoops, I just actually stopped filming there and realised I had missed 2 books off of my list. So one of them is to read a book that is a Lambda Literary Award winner. The Lambda Literary Awards celebrate LGBTQ+ literature. I haven't picked a specific book for this category. I was overwhelmed by the selection when I was looking through the winners, so let me know if you have a recommendation, but something I will keep referring back to as the year goes on. And the other one is to read a myth retelling, something I do not doubt I will do. I have already put one on this list. There's some others I want to read, but if I was going to prioritise something, then it would be Everything Under by Daisy Johnson, because this is a book I'm actually halfway through. I started reading it last year. It's inspired by Oedipus, although it's a modern day literary fiction piece. and I put it down because it is beautifully written, by the way. I was really enjoying it, but it's quite a forlorn, sad book. It has this forlornness to it, and I wasn't in the right headspace. So I do want to go back to it and finish it because it's gorgeous and it is inspired by a myth. But that is my TBR for the 2019 Reading Women Challenge. Do let me know any books you would recommend to fulfill some of those categories. Let me know if you're participating. Even if you're not planning on ticking off all the categories but are just trying to prioritise some you might not otherwise pick up, I'd love to hear what you plan on reading. And of course, let me know your thoughts on any of the books I've mentioned in this video. Until next time, happy reading, and I'll see you all again soon. Bye guys.